I still remember the sound of the clock in my father's study room. Tick, tick, tick. It was loud that evening, louder than usual. Or maybe my mind was just searching for something to hold on to, something steady, something familiar, before everything fell apart. The room smelled like old paper and black coffee. Floor-to-ceiling shelves were filled with files, ledgers, and framed certificates bearing my father's name. His achievements. His legacy. Everything he was proud of. Everything that mattered to him. Everything except me. I stood near the door, hands clasped behind my back, like I always did. I had learned long ago how to stand quietly in that room, how not to interrupt, how not to take up space. I was 32 years old, successful by most standards, and yet in that moment, I felt like a child again, waiting to be acknowledged. My father didn't look at me. He never did, not right away. He was standing near the window, staring out at the garden where the grass was trimmed perfectly and the rose bushes bloomed every spring. My mother had loved that garden. After she passed away, the roses were the only thing he still took care of personally. "I've finalized my will," he said casually, as if he were talking about the weather. I nodded. "I know. You asked me to coordinate with the lawyer." He hummed in response, still not turning around. That was my role after all. I coordinated. I organized. I made sure things ran smoothly behind the scenes. I had done that my entire life. There was a pause. Then he said it. "I never loved you." The words were quiet, calm, almost gentle, but they hit me harder than anything I had ever experienced. For a moment, I honestly thought I misheard him. My brain tried to protect me, tried to reinterpret the sentence into something less cruel. Maybe he meant he didn't love me enough. Maybe he meant he struggled to show love. Maybe. "I never loved you," he repeated, this time turning around to face me. Our eyes met. There was no anger in his expression, no regret, no hesitation, just certainty. I felt something cold spread through my chest, like ice cracking across a frozen lake. I wanted to speak, to ask him why, to argue, to laugh it off as some twisted joke. But my throat refused to cooperate. He walked past me toward his desk and picked up a thin folder. "Everything I own," he continued, flipping it open. "The house, the land, the accounts, the remaining business interests. Everything has been left to your brother." My brother. Armin. Unemployed. 35 years old. Living under my father's roof, surviving on allowances, promises, and endless second chances. The room felt smaller. My voice cracked. I cleared my throat and tried again. "I didn't expect everything, but nothing? Not even." "You don't need it," he cut in. "You've always been independent." Independent. That word had followed me my entire life, like a sentence passed down without appeal. I was independent when I started working at 18. Independent when I paid my own tuition. Independent when I covered hospital bills during my mother's illness. Independent when I took over managing the family business accounts because Armin wasn't good with numbers. Independent meant invisible. "Why?" I finally asked. He exhaled, as if tired. As if this conversation was an inconvenience. "Because you were never really my son," he said. I stared at him, waiting for something, anything, to soften the blow. Nothing came. "You were always strong," he went on. "Too strong. You didn't need me. Armin does." The unfairness of it all pressed down on me like a weight I could no longer carry. "I stayed," I said quietly. "I helped you. I gave everything I had to this family." "You did," he agreed. "And that's why you'll be fine without us." That was it. That was the logic he had built his entire parenting philosophy on. Strong children don't deserve love. Weak ones need to be protected at all costs. I looked around the room again, the awards, the photos, the memories that excluded me even when I was standing right there. There were family pictures on the wall, my father and mother, smiling proudly beside Armin at graduations, birthdays, milestones. I was in the background of one photo, barely visible. "I never asked to be strong," I whispered. For the first time, something flickered across his face, discomfort, maybe. But it passed quickly. This conversation is over, he said, closing the folder. You should know I don't regret my decision. Silence filled the room again. Tick, tick, tick. I nodded slowly. Okay. That was all I said. No shouting. No accusations. No begging. I turned toward the door. As my hand touched the handle, he spoke again. You were a mistake, he said. But at least you became useful. That was the moment something inside me finally broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. I walked out without another word. The hallway outside felt unfamiliar, like I had stepped into someone else's house. My brother's laughter drifted in from the living room. He was sprawled on the couch, phone in hand, completely unaware that his future had just been handed to him on a silver platter. He didn't even look up as I passed. I went to my room, the same room I had lived in since childhood, and closed the door behind me. For a long time, I just stood there. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my hands. These hands had worked, built, fixed, supported, and yet, according to the man who gave me my name, they belonged to someone unworthy of love. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, a single thought formed in my mind, clear, sharp, and impossible to ignore. If I was never his son, then I owed him nothing. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the hurt and disbelief, a quiet resolve began to take shape. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of theirs. The house had always been quiet at night. Not peaceful, just quiet in the way abandoned places are quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and forces your thoughts to grow louder. That night, after leaving my father's study, I didn't turn on the lights in my room. I sat in the darkness, listening to the faint hum of the ceiling fan, replaying every moment of my life like a trial where the verdict had already been decided. 2 sons, 1 house, 1 father, but 2 completely different realities. Growing up, people used to say we were lucky. A respectable family, a solid home, a father with a business, a mother who kept everything together with warmth and quiet strength. From the outside, we looked complete. From the inside, I was learning very early how love could be selective. Armin was 2 years older than me, but he always felt younger, not in age, but in responsibility. If he forgot his homework, my father laughed it off. If he fails, we'll handle it, he'd say. When I forgot mine, the disappointment was immediate and sharp. You know better, my father would say, shaking his head. I expect more from you. That sentence followed me for decades. I was expected to understand without being taught, to succeed without being guided, to endure without being comforted. Armin, on the other hand, was allowed to stumble endlessly. His failures were treated like unfortunate accidents. Mine were treated like personal betrayals. When I was 16, Armin crashed my father's car. He walked away with a scratch on his arm and a sheepish smile. My father hugged him first. Cars can be replaced, he said. You can't. That night, I lay awake wondering what I was, then, if not irreplaceable. At 18, I took my first job. It wasn't glamorous. Long hours, low pay, constant pressure. But I was proud. I brought home my first paycheck and placed it quietly on the kitchen counter. My father glanced at it and nodded. Good, he said. Now you'll learn how the world works. When Armin quit his 3rd job in a year, complaining about stress and unfair bosses, my father sat him down gently. Not everyone is built for struggle, he told him. Take your time. I was built for struggle. Or rather, I was assigned to it. After my mother got sick, everything changed and somehow stayed exactly the same. Hospitals became my second home. I managed appointments, insurance paperwork, late-night pharmacy runs. I slept on plastic chairs in waiting rooms while Armin couldn't handle hospitals. My father praised me for being reliable. He never thanked me. When my mother passed away, something in our family fractured permanently. The warmth disappeared. The house grew colder. And whatever thin thread of emotional connection I might have had with my father snapped completely. Grief didn't bring us closer. It clarified roles. Armin became someone to protect. I became someone to rely on. And reliance, I learned, was not the same as love. Years passed. I graduated, built a career, quietly paid off debts my father never acknowledged, took over managing parts of the family business because Armin wasn't ready yet. He was never ready. At family gatherings, relatives praised my success. "You must be proud," they told my father. He smiled politely. "Yes," he said. "He's very capable." Capable. Not loved. Not cherished. Capable. When Armin was praised, the words were different. He has a good heart. He's sensitive. He just needs support. Support he received in abundance. By the time my father began discussing his will, nothing about his decision should have surprised me. And yet it did. Because some part of me, small, foolish, and persistent, still believed effort would be rewarded. That loyalty would count for something. That blood meant fairness. I thought wrong. The will wasn't just a legal document. It was a confirmation of everything I had tried not to see. Armin inherited the house I helped maintain, the land I paid taxes on, the business I helped stabilize. I inherited clarity. Sitting alone in my dark room that night, I finally allowed myself to feel something I had avoided my entire life. Anger. Not explosive, screaming anger, but something colder, sharper, and understanding. I wasn't overlooked. I was deliberately excluded. My father hadn't failed to love me. He had chosen not to. And in that realization, something shifted inside me. I saw my childhood not as a series of misunderstandings, but as a pattern, a system, a hierarchy where I existed to support, never to receive. I stood up and walked to the mirror. The man staring back at me looked calm, controlled. But behind his eyes was a quiet decision forming, one that didn't need validation or revenge to survive. I wouldn't fight for a place that was never meant for me. I wouldn't beg for affection that came with conditions. And I certainly wouldn't keep sacrificing myself for people who saw my strength as a resource, not a gift. The next morning I would pack my bags. Not in anger, not in haste, but with the certainty of someone who finally understands his value, even if his own father never did. And as the sun rose outside that house, lighting up walls that had never truly been mine, I realized something powerful. Being the forgotten son had taught me how to survive alone. And surviving alone had prepared me to build a life they could never control. Morning came quietly. No thunder. No dramatic confrontation. No tears streaming down my face. Just sunlight slipping through the thin gap in my curtains, landing softly on the floor of a room that had never truly been mine. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, fully dressed, my suitcase open in front of me. I hadn't packed much. Clothes. Documents. A few books. The essentials of a life that had always been expected to stay light, portable, replaceable. The house was already awake. I could hear my father moving around downstairs, the clink of a cup against a saucer, the familiar rhythm of a morning routine that had never included me emotionally, even when I had been physically present. I folded the last shirt and placed it neatly in the suitcase. No anger guided my hands. No rush. Just clarity. Before closing the zipper, I paused and looked around the room. The desk where I had studied late into the night. The corner where my mother used to sit and talk to me when my father wasn't around. The walls that had heard my silent promises to myself, that one day, things would be different. They were different now, just not in the way I once imagined. I picked up my laptop and slid it into my bag. As I did, a thought crossed my mind, calm, deliberate, unavoidable. They think I'm walking away empty-handed. I almost smiled. Downstairs, the smell of coffee filled the kitchen. My father stood near the counter, newspaper in hand. He looked up when he heard my footsteps. "Where are you going?" he asked, his tone neutral, almost bored. "Out," I said simply. He glanced at the suitcase. "For how long?" I met his eyes. "For good." That got his attention. He lowered the newspaper slowly, studying my face as if searching for something, anger, desperation, regret. He found none of it. "You're being dramatic," he said. "Sit down. Eat something." "I'm not hungry." Armin was sprawled across the living room couch, still half asleep, phone glowing in his hand. He didn't even look up when he heard my voice. Did he finally quit? Armin muttered, smirking. I didn't respond. My father sighed, rubbing his temples. You'll regret this, he said. You always come back. That was when I understood something important. He truly believed that. He believed I would return because I always had, emotionally, financially, physically. He believed my strength was a leash, not wings. I won't, I said calmly. He scoffed. You don't have a house. I'll find one. You don't have support. I never did. The silence between us stretched. Then he said it, not cruelly but carelessly, which somehow made it worse. You were never meant to stay. I nodded. I know. That surprised him. I walked toward the door, but before stepping out I stopped. There's something you should know, I said, turning back. He raised an eyebrow. What? I've resigned from the business. His expression hardened. You can't just resign. I already did, I replied. Emails were sent last night. Access credentials returned. That was only half the truth. Yes, I had resigned, but I had also done something else. For years, I had quietly been the backbone of operations. Supplier negotiations, financials oversight, system optimizations, risk management. None of it carried my name, but all of it carried my fingerprints. Before packing my bag, I had secured copies of my work, legal, clean, documented. My intellectual contributions, my systems, my processes, not to sabotage, but to protect what was mine. My father didn't understand that yet. You're replaceable, he said sharply. I smiled, not out of arrogance, but certainty. Then you won't miss me. I turned and walked out. The front door closed behind me with a soft click. No slam. No final speech. Just a clean exit. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, colder, real. I placed my suitcase in the trunk of my car and stood there for a moment, staring at the house. It looked the same as it always had. Strong, imposing, permanent. But permanence is an illusion when foundations are borrowed. As I drove away, my phone buzzed. A message from a supplier. Just confirming, future coordination will be through you directly, correct? I didn't reply immediately. Another notification followed. Then another. Clients, vendors, partners, people who knew, who actually kept things running. I pulled over to the side of the road and finally allowed myself to breathe. This wasn't revenge. It was separation. There is a difference. Revenge seeks to destroy. Separation seeks to survive. And survival, I had learned, was my specialty. That evening, I checked into a small apartment. Nothing fancy. Clean. Quiet. Mine. I placed my suitcase down and sat on the floor, back against the wall. For the first time in my life, no one needed anything from me. No one expected me to fix a problem. No one relied on my strength. No one confused my silence for obedience. And in that stillness, I realized something profound. Walking away wasn't weakness. It was the first decision I had ever made purely for myself. Somewhere, back in that house, my father believed he had finally drawn a line. What he didn't know, what he couldn't yet see, was that by pushing me out, he had removed the one thing holding everything together. And I wasn't going to warn him. The first week passed without a single phone call. Not from my father. Not from Armin. And I didn't expect one. People assume silence means nothing is happening. They assume damage announces itself loudly, with arguments, ultimatums, chaos. But real damage? It arrives quietly. I settled into my new routine faster than I thought I would. Morning runs. Coffee brewed exactly the way I liked it. Emails answered on my own schedule, not between emergencies created by other people's irresponsibility. For the first time, my time belonged to me. Back at the house, however, confusion was beginning to take root. It started small. A supplier called Armin asking for clarification on an invoice I used to approve. Armin promised to check with the team, a team that didn't exist. When the supplier followed up 2 days later, there was still no answer. The payment was delayed. Then another. Then another. By the end of the second week, emails marked urgent began piling up in an inbox no one knew how to manage. My father noticed the tension before he understood the cause. "Why are payments late?" he asked one evening. Armin shrugged. "Probably a system issue." That used to be my cue. I would quietly log in, trace the problem, smooth things over before it reached his desk. This time, no one came. At first, my father told himself it was temporary, that businesses had fluctuations, that things would stabilize. They always had, because I always had. By the third week, the phone rang more often. Vendors wanted reassurances. Clients wanted timelines. Account managers wanted meetings. Armin began leaving the house earlier, returning later, his confidence thinning by the day. He snapped at customer service representatives. He blamed software. He blamed market conditions. He never blamed himself. And my father watched all of this unfold with a growing sense of unease, the kind that comes when control starts slipping through fingers you didn't realize were trembling. One afternoon, my phone lit up. Father calling. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I let it ring. An hour later, another call. Then a message. "We need to talk." I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because for the first time, I wasn't obligated to fix what they broke. By the end of the month, consequences became impossible to ignore. A long-standing client pulled out, citing organizational instability. A supplier demanded upfront payment. The accountant requested an emergency review. The business wasn't collapsing. Not yet. It was bleeding. Slowly. Quietly. In places no one thought to look until it was too late. My father finally understood something was wrong when he tried to access a financial overview he hadn't checked in years. The dashboard didn't update. He stared at the screen longer than necessary. "Where is he?" he asked Armin. Armin didn't answer right away. I thought he just handled things," he said defensively. I didn't know it was all him. That admission landed heavily in the room. For the first time, my father realized the truth he had refused to see. The system hadn't been self-sustaining. It had been me. That night, I received another call. This time, I answered. "What do you want?" I asked calmly. There was a pause. "You didn't tell us everything you did," my father said. "I didn't hide anything," I replied. "You just never ask. You left us vulnerable." I exhaled slowly. "No." I left. Silence filled the line. "You need to come back," he said finally. "I don't. You owe this family." I felt something tighten in my chest, not pain but clarity. "I paid my debt," I said. "For years." Another pause. Then softer. "Your brother can't handle this." "I know." "Then help him." I closed my eyes. "I already did," I said. "By leaving. Now he has to grow." The call ended shortly after. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, city lights flickering through the window, and reflected on how strange it felt to be missed only when absent. No one had ever asked how I managed everything. They only noticed when it stopped working. And that realization, more than the betrayal, changed something deep inside me. I wasn't angry. I was done. Because when people only value you for what you provide, your absence becomes your loudest statement. And mine was echoing through every unpaid invoice, every confused phone call, every sleepless night they were now experiencing without me. This wasn't revenge. This was reality catching up. And it had just begun. Success didn't arrive with fireworks. It came quietly, the way real change always does, unnoticed at first, underestimated until it was undeniable. The first few weeks on my own were not glamorous. The apartment was small, the furniture minimal. My mornings were silent except for the sound of my laptop booting up and the distant noise of traffic outside the window. No assistance. No inherited safety net. Just me, my skills, and a lifetime of experience no one had ever bothered to acknowledge properly. And for the first time, that was enough. I didn't announce my independence to anyone. I didn't post about it. I didn't feel the need to prove anything. Instead, I began doing what I had always done best, solving problems, one client at a time. I reached out to people I had worked with quietly over the years. Not as my father's son. Not as part of a family brand. Just as myself. The responses surprised me. Not with excitement, but with relief. "We were hoping you'd go independent someday," one client admitted during our first call. Another said, "Honestly, we always assumed you were the real operation behind everything." Those words settled into me slowly. Not like praise, but like validation long overdue. Within a month, I had more work than I expected. Projects stacked up. Consultations turned into retainers. Retainers turned into long-term contracts. And every agreement came with something I had never received before: respect. I set my own hours, chose my own clients, said no when something didn't align. There was no one to remind me of my place. No one to reduce my contribution to duty. I registered my consultancy under my own name. Simple. Clean. No legacy attached. No shadow to live under. And something unexpected happened. I started sleeping better. The tension that had lived permanently in my shoulders began to fade. I laughed more, not loudly, but genuinely. I realized how much energy I had been spending trying to earn affection that was never going to be offered. Freed from that burden, everything felt lighter. Meanwhile, the world I left behind continued to struggle. Not dramatically, not publicly, but consistently. I didn't track their failures. I didn't need to. News has a way of traveling when your absence creates a vacuum. A former vendor mentioned delayed payments. A mutual acquaintance hinted at stress in the household. Someone else casually noted how often my father looked tired lately. I listened without comment. This wasn't satisfaction. It was confirmation. I was no longer the silent support holding up a structure built on imbalance. And without that support, the cracks were becoming visible. One afternoon, I was invited to speak at a small industry event. Nothing major, just a panel discussion on operational efficiency and leadership. I almost declined. Then I remembered how many times I had stood behind someone else while my work was presented as theirs. So, I accepted. Standing on that stage, answering questions, sharing insights I had developed through years of unseen labor, I felt something shift. I wasn't proving anything. I was claiming it. After the event, a journalist approached me. "You have a very grounded perspective," she said. "Who did you learn from?" I paused. "Myself," I answered honestly. That evening, an article went live. It didn't mention my father. It didn't mention the family business. It mentioned me. By the third month, my calendar was full. My income stabilized, then exceeded what I had been earning before. But money wasn't the milestone that mattered most. Autonomy was. For the first time, no one could threaten to take anything away from me, because everything I had built myself. One night, as I closed my laptop after a long day, my phone buzzed. A message from Armin. "Dad isn't doing well. The pressure is getting to him." I read it once. Then again. I didn't reply immediately. Because empathy doesn't require self-sacrifice. And concern doesn't mean surrender. I sat there, staring at the city lights, understanding something that would have once felt cruel, but now felt simply true. My success did not cause their struggle. Their dependence caused it. I had simply stepped out of the role they assigned me. And in doing so, I discovered the version of myself that had always been waiting, patient, capable, and finally free. This wasn't revenge. This was growth. And growth, unlike resentment, doesn't need an audience. Armin had always believed things would work out. Not because he planned well. Not because he worked hard. But because they always had before. Someone else fixed things. Someone else stepped in. Someone else carried the weight. And now, for the first time in his life, there was no one else. At first, he treated the growing problems like temporary inconveniences. Missed calls went unanswered. Emails piled up unopened. He told himself the business was just going through a rough patch, that once things settled, everything would return to normal. But normal had always included me. Without realizing it, Armin had inherited more than property and accounts. He had inherited responsibility, something he had never learned how to carry. Meetings were postponed. Deadlines slipped. Clients grew impatient. And every failure chipped away at the confidence he pretended to have. He tried to get a job. That alone felt like a defeat. At 35, sitting in interviews with managers younger than him, answering questions he wasn't prepared for, pretending to have discipline he had never developed, it drained him quickly. No one was impressed by potential anymore. They wanted proof. And Armin had none. Each rejection stung more than the last. Not because he wanted the work, but because he had never been told no this many times before. Back at the house, the atmosphere changed. My father noticed at first. Armin stopped joking, stopped sleeping well, stopped pretending everything was under control. Bills arrived faster than income. Maintenance issues piled up. The once proud house began to feel heavy, not like a home, but like a responsibility no one knew how to manage. One evening, my father found Armin sitting at the dining table, head in his hands, surrounded by papers he didn't understand. "What's going on?" my father asked. Armin didn't look up. "I can't keep up," he admitted quietly. The words hung in the air. My father froze. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Armin was supposed to thrive with support. He was supposed to grow into the role my father had protected for him all these years. Instead, he was unraveling under the very pressure he had been shielded from. For the first time, my father saw the truth he had avoided. By protecting Armin from struggle, he had also protected him from growth. And now, the world wasn't being gentle. Stress took its toll quickly. My father's health began to decline. Headaches, sleepless nights, doctor visits he brushed off as nothing serious. But I could picture it clearly, the way worry weighed on him, the way regret crept in when denial no longer worked. Armin tried to compensate. He worked longer hours, unproductively, made impulsive decisions, took advice from the wrong people. Each mistake dug the hole deeper. The house was mortgaged quietly, without announcements. Savings were used to patch holes instead of building stability. Pride kept them from asking for help until desperation made silence impossible. Then came the call. Not from my father. From the hospital. "Your father has been admitted," the nurse said calmly. "We recommend you come." I sat there for a long moment after the call ended. This was the moment I had imagined in anger before, the moment when they would finally need me. But anger wasn't what I felt. I felt distance. Concern, yes. Sadness, maybe. But not obligation. Still, blood has a pull that logic cannot erase completely. I went. The hospital room was dim and quiet, filled with the steady rhythm of machines and the faint smell of disinfectant. My father looked smaller than I remembered, not physically weak, but diminished by the weight of choices catching up to him. Armin stood near the window, arms crossed tightly, avoiding my eyes. Neither of them spoke when I entered. Finally, my father broke the silence. "You look well," he said. I nodded. "I am." That answer seemed to surprise him. Armin shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't know it would be like this," he said suddenly. I thought I could handle it." I looked at him carefully. This wasn't the brother I had resented for years. This was a man meeting reality for the first time, unprepared, unsupported, and scared. "I know," I said. My father watched us both. For the first time, he wasn't comparing us. He was measuring the cost of his choices. And in that quiet hospital room, surrounded by consequences instead of excuses, the truth finally became impossible to ignore. Favoritism doesn't protect anyone. It just delays the fall. And that fall had begun. The hospital room felt too quiet for the amount of history sitting inside it. Machines hummed softly, steady and indifferent, like time itself, moving forward without concern for regret or reconciliation. Pale light filtered through the blinds, cutting the room into thin stripes of shadow and white. My father lay on the bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling as if answers might be written there. Armin stood near the window, his reflection faint in the glass. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, emotionally. The confidence that had always wrapped around him like armor was gone, replaced by something fragile and unfamiliar.
Fear. No one spoke for a while.
There are moments when words feel too weak, too small to carry the weight of everything left unsaid. This was one of them. My father finally turned his head toward me. "You didn't have to come," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. That answer lingered between us. He swallowed, his throat tightening. "But you did." I nodded. Not out of duty. Not out of forgiveness. Just humanity. The silence stretched again until my father spoke, his voice lower now, stripped of authority. "I made mistakes." The words were careful, measured, as if saying them too loudly might shatter something fragile inside him.
I didn't respond.
Not because I disagreed, but because I needed him to continue. "I thought strength meant independence," he said. "I thought if you didn't need me, then you didn't need love." His hands trembled slightly as they rested on the thin hospital blanket. "You were always capable, always composed. You never broke down, never asked for help. So I convinced myself you were fine." I closed my eyes briefly. "I wasn't," I said softly. His breath caught. "I know that now," he whispered. "But I didn't then." Armin shifted uncomfortably behind us. He looked at the floor, then at me, then away again, like a child overhearing a conversation he wasn't meant to hear. My father continued, his voice cracking under the weight of honesty. "I was afraid of you. That made me open my eyes." "Afraid?" I repeated. He nodded. "You reminded me of myself," he admitted. Driven, self-sufficient, unwilling to fail. I saw in you everything I had to become, and everything it cost me." He took a shallow breath. "With Armin, I saw my weaknesses, and I tried to protect him from them. I finally understood. Not justified, not forgiven, but understood. I thought if I gave him everything," my father continued, "he would grow into it."
His voice faltered.
"But I gave him comfort instead of character." Armin's jaw tightened. His eyes were glassy now. "I didn't mean to fail you," my father said, looking between us. "Either of you." I stepped closer to the bed. "You didn't fail me by giving him more," I said calmly. "You failed me by giving me nothing." Tears slipped down his face silently. "I never told you I was proud of you," he said. "I never said I loved you." "No," I agreed. "You didn't." He turned his face toward me fully now, desperation replacing pride. "Say it now," he pleaded. The room held its breath. I searched his face, not for guilt, but for truth. "I don't need the words anymore," I said gently. "I needed them when I was younger." He closed his eyes, the weight of that realization settling deeply. "I was wrong," he whispered. Armin finally spoke. "I always thought you didn't care," he said to me, his voice raw. "You never fought for attention, never complained." I met his gaze. I learned early that fighting didn't change anything. My father reached out weakly, his hand hovering between us. "I tried to change the will," he said. "I called the lawyer." I shook my head.
"No."
He looked confused. "Why not?" "Because this isn't about money," I replied. "It never was." His eyes filled again. "What do you want then?" I didn't answer immediately. Some questions deserve silence before truth. "I want honesty," I said finally. "And I want you to stop confusing control with care." The machines continued their steady rhythm. Time didn't stop for healing. But something shifted in that room. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Something quieter. Acceptance. When I left the hospital that night, I didn't feel lighter, but I felt complete. The words I had waited my entire life to hear had finally been spoken. Too late to change the past, but just in time to release it. The lawyer arrived 2 days later. Not with confidence, with caution. He stood in the hospital corridor flipping through documents, glancing nervously at the door as if unsure whether what he was about to do would fix something or make it worse. My father had insisted. "I need to correct it," he had said, "before it's too late." I stood outside the room, arms crossed, listening as the lawyer explained the process.
Papers.
Amendments.
Signatures.
A new distribution of assets. one that would finally recognize me. A lifetime late. When the door opened and my father motioned for me to come in, his eyes were tired but determined. "I want to change the will," he said. "I want to make this right." The lawyer nodded, already preparing his pen. I shook my head.
No.
The word fell into the room like something fragile and final. Everyone froze. Armin looked at me as if I had spoken another language. My father frowned. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean exactly that," I said calmly. "I don't want it." The lawyer hesitated, unsure whether to continue or quietly disappear. "You deserve it," my father insisted. "Everything you did, everything I didn't do, this is the least I can give you." I took a slow breath. "Money won't rewrite childhood," I said. "And ownership won't give me back what I needed then." My father's voice trembled. "Then what do you want?" I looked at him, not as a son seeking approval, but as a man speaking to another man. "I want you to tell the truth," I said, out loud, without excuses. The room went silent. Armin shifted uncomfortably. My father swallowed. "I chose comfort over fairness," he said slowly. "I chose control over connection. I punished strength and rewarded dependence." Each sentence seemed to drain him. "I convinced myself you didn't need love because I didn't know how to give it without losing power." His eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong." I nodded. "That's all I needed." The lawyer closed his folder quietly. There would be no amendment. Later that evening, I walked Armin out of the hospital. He stopped near the entrance, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, shoulders slumped. "I don't know how to do this without you," he admitted. I looked at him carefully. "You're going to learn," I said. "The same way I did." He frowned. "By being alone? By being responsible?" He didn't argue. For the first time in his life, no one was protecting him from discomfort. My father passed away 3 months later. There was no dramatic farewell. No final speech. Just quiet. At the funeral, people spoke about his achievements, his discipline, his success. No one spoke about love. I stood at the back, listening without resentment. The estate remained with Armin. But now it felt different. Not like a reward. Like a burden. As I watched him accept condolences he wasn't ready for, I realized something important. I had already received what I needed. Closure. Not from inheritance, but from truth. And that truth had set me free. After the funeral, life didn't pause the way movies pretend it does. There were no dramatic silences stretched across days. No grand realizations delivered in a single moment. Instead, life moved forward the way it always does, steadily, indifferently, forcing everyone to either keep up or be left behind. Armin stayed in the house. At first, he tried to fill it with noise. Friends came over more often. Music played louder than necessary. The lights stayed on late into the night, as if darkness itself was something he was trying to avoid. But noise can't replace structure, and distraction can't replace discipline. The house didn't feel like a victory anymore. It felt heavy. Every bill carried weight. Every repair felt urgent. Every decision demanded accountability he had never practiced before. Without our father's authority, and without me quietly fixing things behind the scenes, Armin was forced to confront something unfamiliar. Consequences. He called me once a week at first, then twice. Not to ask for money. Not yet. Just to ask questions. How do I renegotiate this contract? Is this expense normal? What would you do here? I answered briefly. Not coldly. Not generously.
Clearly.
Because help without boundaries becomes dependency, and I refuse to recreate the same imbalance that had shaped both our lives. You should talk to a professional, I told him more than once. He didn't like that answer. But he accepted it. Slowly, visibly, painfully, Armin began to change. Not dramatically, but genuinely. He sold a car he didn't need. Cut expenses he once ignored. Started waking up early, not because someone told him to, but because he had to. The house shrank around him as his responsibilities grew. And for the first time, I saw him not as the favored child or the burdened heir, but simply as a man learning late. As for me, my life continued to expand. My consultancy grew steadily. Not explosively, sustainably. I chose projects that challenged me instead of draining me. I built routines that honored my time instead of sacrificing it. I stopped measuring my worth through effort alone. Peace became a metric. Some nights I thought about my father, not with anger, with clarity. I understood him now in ways I never could as a child. I saw how fear had shaped his choices, how control had replaced tenderness, how favoritism had been his way of avoiding his own weaknesses. Understanding didn't erase the damage, but it softened the edges. One afternoon, months later, Armin invited me to the house. "I cleaned out Dad's study," he said. "There are things you should see." I hesitated before going. The house no longer triggered anger, just distance. When I walked into the study, it looked smaller than I remembered. The shelves were half empty now. Papers boxed up. Certificates taken down. Armin handed me a folder. Inside were old letters. Unsent. Drafts my father had written, but never shared. Pages filled with crossed-out sentences. Half-finished apologies. Thoughts he never learned how to say out loud. One line stood out. "I raised him to survive, but forgot to teach myself how to love." I closed the folder quietly.
"I didn't know," Armin said.
"He never showed this side to me either." I nodded. "That was his tragedy," I said. "Not ours." When I left the house that day, I didn't feel like something had ended. I felt like something had finally settled. I had helped my brother without saving him. I had honored my father without excusing him. And I had chosen myself without guilt. Not forgetting, but letting go. Because some wounds don't disappear. They stop bleeding when you stop reopening them. People often think endings arrive with noise, with confrontation, with justice delivered loudly, with someone finally winning. But real endings are quieter. They come when you stop waiting for something that was never coming. Long after the funeral, long after the calls slowed and the house faded into memory, I found myself standing alone in my apartment one evening, staring out at the city lights. The world was moving the way it always had, unaware of the battles that had shaped me, indifferent to the words that once nearly broke me. "I never loved you." That sentence no longer hurt. Not because it wasn't cruel, but because it no longer defined me. For years, I had lived as if love were something earned through usefulness, as if strength required silence, as if being needed was the same as being valued. I was wrong. Love is not a transaction, and strength does not cancel the need for tenderness. I didn't rebuild my life to prove my father wrong. I rebuilt it because I finally understood I was worthy without proof. My work continued to grow, not endlessly, not obsessively, but intentionally. I hired carefully, trusted slowly, built partnerships rooted in respect, not obligation. And when people asked about my past, I spoke simply. "I come from a complicated family," I said. That was enough. Armin and I found a new balance over time. Not closeness, not distance, honesty. He learned to stand on his own, awkwardly at first, then steadily. I watched without interference, offering guidance only when asked, and never again stepping into the role of rescuer. He didn't become strong overnight, but he became real. One afternoon, months later, he called me. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. It wasn't something I had waited for, but it mattered. And then there was me. I stopped measuring my life by milestones that impressed others. I measured it by peace, by rest, by how often I laughed without needing a reason. Some nights, I thought about the boy I had been, the one standing quietly in doorways, hoping to be seen. I wished I could tell him one thing. You don't need their permission to matter. My father once believed love weakened authority. He was wrong. Love strengthens what power cannot. And I didn't inherit his estate. I inherited something far more permanent. Self-respect, freedom, and the understanding that family doesn't get to define your worth, only your beginning. "I never loved you," he said. So I did something else. I loved myself enough to walk away. And in doing so, I finally walked toward a life that belonged entirely to me. And